A millionaire marries a homeless nurse, and what he learns about her shatters his world. The rain poured heavily on the city streets, washing away the filth of the night, but not the emptiness in Lucas Marshall's heart. He was a man who had everything: wealth, power, and a name that echoed in business circles. But at that moment, standing outside his $1 million penthouse, he was about to lose it all. "A bet? You think I can't survive like them?" Lucas scoffed, swirling the whiskey in his glass as he leaned back in his leather chair. His best friend Daniel smirked. "Not survive. Live. You wouldn't last a week without your money." The challenge was simple but humiliating. Lucas had to abandon his wealth for 1 month and live like an ordinary person. No credit cards, no fancy cars, no luxurious penthouses. Just the clothes on his back and a few dollars in his pocket. Lucas laughed at first. It was absurd. But something inside him, it wasn't pride, maybe it was boredom, made him agree. And that's how he found himself, for the first time in his life, walking through the city with nothing but a backpack and a few crumpled bills. No driver, no assistants, no security, just Lucas Marshall, the billionaire, now just another nameless man in the crowd. That's when he saw her, a woman in tattered scrubs, kneeling in the rain, pressing her hands over a bleeding man's chest. Her eyes were filled with something Lucas hadn't seen in years. Lucas stood there watching the woman fight against time, her trembling hands pressing against the injured man's chest. The rain soaked her already worn-out scrubs, but she didn't seem to care. Her focus was solely on keeping the man alive. "Stay with me. Just keep breathing," she whispered, her voice filled with desperation. Lucas had seen doctors and nurses at the finest hospitals, but none of them had looked like this. Tired, poor, desperate. And yet she cared more than any of them. A part of him wanted to keep walking. This wasn't his problem. But something about the scene rooted him in place. The man coughed, blood spilling from his lips. The woman's hands were trembling, but her determination never wavered. Then, the sound of sirens pierced the air. An ambulance pulled up and paramedics rushed out. The woman exhaled deeply, exhaustion written all over her face. As they loaded the man onto the stretcher, she turned to leave, her steps weak, almost stumbling. Lucas followed instinctively. "Hey!" She stopped and looked at him. For the first time, he saw her face up close, soft yet worn out, her deep brown eyes carrying exhaustion beyond her years. "What?" she asked, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "You're a nurse?" he asked. "Why were you helping him like that?" She scoffed. "What kind of question is that?" She shook her head and started walking away. Lucas wasn't sure why, but he followed. "I just mean, people don't usually get involved like that, especially not for a stranger." She stopped in front of a small alleyway and turned to face him. "Then maybe you're hanging out with the wrong people." Lucas smirked. "You have no idea." She tilted her head, eyeing him suspiciously. "Who are you?" He hesitated, saying his real name would blow his cover. He wasn't supposed to be Lucas Marshall, billionaire. Right now he was just a man trying to survive a ridiculous bet. Just a guy trying to figure things out. She studied him for a moment before sighing. "Well, just a guy." "If you're lost, don't follow strangers into dark alleys," Lucas chuckled. "Duly noted. But what about you? Where are you going?" She hesitated before answering. "To work." He glanced at her soaked scrubs, clearly past their prime. "You work at a hospital?" She shook her head. "Not anymore." Something in her tone made Lucas curious. There was a story behind that answer, but before he could ask, she turned and disappeared down the alley. Lucas stood there watching her leave, a strange feeling settling in his chest. He had a month to live as an ordinary man. And somehow, he felt that this woman, whoever she was, would change everything. So Lucas found himself wandering the streets after their brief encounter, his mind lingering on the mysterious nurse. There was something about her, a quiet strength, a kindness he wasn't used to seeing in people around him. The next evening, as he walked aimlessly, he spotted her again. This time, she was sitting outside a rundown shelter handing out sandwiches to a group of homeless people. His curiosity got the better of him. "You again?" he said, approaching her. She looked up, her face dimly lit by a flickering street lamp. "And you're still following me?" Lucas smirked. "What can I say? You're the only interesting thing I've come across since I got here." She sighed, handing him a sandwich without asking if he wanted one. "Here. You look like you could use a meal." Lucas stared at it. It was a simple peanut butter and jelly sandwich, something he hadn't eaten since he was a kid. He hesitated before taking it, his pride resisting but his stomach telling another story. "You always do this?" he asked, taking a bite. "Do what?" she said, sitting beside him. "Help strangers. Take care of people who have nothing to offer you in return." She glanced at him, chewing her own sandwich. "Why does kindness need a reason?" Lucas had no answer to that. In his world, everything had a price. Over the next few days, he saw more of her. Chloe, that was her name. She never told him her last name, and he never asked. She worked at a small, overcrowded free clinic, patching up people who couldn't afford hospital bills. She volunteered at shelters, handed out food, and spent her nights in a tiny rundown apartment that barely had furniture. And yet, she was always smiling. Lucas couldn't understand it. "Why do you live like this?" he asked one night as they sat outside the shelter watching the city lights in the distance. Chloe chuckled. "What kind of question is that?" "I mean..." He struggled for words. "You could do so much more. Get a better job. Find a way out of this." Her smile faded slightly. "You think I don't want that?" Lucas raised an eyebrow. "So why don't you?" Chloe exhaled, hugging her knees. "Because life isn't that simple. I had a great job once, a real apartment, a normal life." "What happened?" She hesitated before answering. "I lost it all, trying to do the right thing." Lucas frowned. "What do you mean?" Chloe looked away, the weight of old memories making her shoulders sag. "I was a nurse at one of the top hospitals in the city. I loved my job. But then, I saw something I wasn't supposed to." Lucas leaned in, his curiosity piqued. "What did you see?" "A patient, a homeless man. He needed urgent care, but the hospital refused because he didn't have insurance. He begged, but they turned him away, and he died right outside the hospital doors." Lucas tensed. "That's messed up." Chloe's jaw clenched. "I thought so too. So I reported it. Spoke up against the hospital's policies, and you know what happened?" Lucas already knew the answer. "They fired you." Chloe nodded. "They blacklisted me. No hospital would hire me after that. I lost my apartment, my savings ran out, and before I knew it, this became my life." Lucas stared at her, his mind spinning. He had never met someone like her, someone who had risked everything for the sake of others. "And you don't regret it?" he asked softly. Chloe looked at him, a small smile forming. "Number. Because if I hadn't done it, I wouldn't be the person I am today." Lucas felt something shift inside him. This woman was nothing like the people he knew. She had nothing, yet she had everything that he lacked. And for the first time in his life, Lucas Marshall, the billionaire, felt poor. But then everything changed. One evening, as Lucas helped Chloe carry boxes of medical supplies into the clinic, a black SUV pulled up. The doors swung open, and two men stepped out. Lucas instantly recognized them. His security team. "Mr. Marshall," one of them said, stepping forward, "we need to take you home now." Chloe froze. "Mr. Marshall?" She turned to Lucas, confusion in her eyes. "What's going on?" Lucas swallowed hard. He had been caught. The month was up. The bet was over. "Lucas, who are you?" Chloe's voice was barely a whisper. The lie was over. The truth was about to destroy everything. Chloe took a step back, her face pale. "Lucas, Mr. Marshall, as in Lucas Marshall, the billionaire?" Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. The moment he had been dreading had arrived. "I wanted to tell you—" "When?" Her voice was sharp, cutting through the night air. "Before or after you were done playing your little experiment." The security team stood at a distance waiting, but Lucas ignored them. His focus was on Chloe, the woman who had unknowingly changed his entire world. "It wasn't an experiment," he said, his voice low. "It was a bet. My friend, he challenged me to live without money for a month, to see if I could survive." Chloe let out a bitter laugh. "And I was what? Some kind of charity case in your game?" "No. You were—" He stopped himself. What was she? He didn't have the words, but he knew she was more than just someone he had met on this ridiculous bet. Chloe's hands clenched at her sides. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I let you into my life. I told you things I don't tell anyone. And the whole time you were just, pretending?" Lucas felt his chest tighten. He had never cared what people thought of him before. But this was different. "I wasn't pretending," he said firmly. "I was just trying to be someone different, someone better." Chloe shook her head. "You don't get to try being better like it's some experiment, Lucas. People like me don't have that luxury. We don't get to wake up one day and decide to play poor." Lucas took a step closer. "You changed me, Chloe. You made me see things I never saw before." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "But that doesn't change the fact that you lied." Silence stretched between them. Lucas wanted to fix this. But how could he, when everything between them had been built on a lie? The sound of the SUV door opening made Chloe flinch. One of the security guards spoke. "Sir, we should leave. Your father is expecting you." Lucas clenched his fists. He didn't want to leave. Not like this. But when he turned back to Chloe, the look in her eyes shattered him. Disappointment, not anger, not hatred, just disappointment. And that was worse than anything. Without another word, Chloe turned around and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Lucas wanted to call after her. But deep down he knew. She was already gone. Days passed, but the weight in Lucas's chest didn't. He was back in his world, penthouse views, tailored suits, meetings about money that no longer seemed important. But something was missing. She was missing. Chloe hadn't returned his calls. She had disappeared from the clinic. It was like she had erased herself from his life. For the first time, Lucas realized something terrifying. All the money in the world couldn't fix what he had broken. One evening, he sat in his office, staring at his reflection in the darkened glass. He barely recognized himself. Had he always been this empty? Then, a knock. Daniel stepped in, tossing a newspaper onto Lucas's desk. "You're on the front page. Again." Lucas barely glanced at it. Another business deal? Another headline about wealth. None of it mattered. Daniel leaned against the desk. "You look like hell, man." Lucas scoffed. "Feel like it too." Daniel smirked. "Guess money doesn't solve everything, huh?" Lucas looked up sharply. That one sentence hit harder than it should have. "No," he admitted. "It doesn't." Daniel's smirk faded. He picked up the newspaper, flipping it open. "Then maybe it's time you used it for something that actually matters." He handed the paper to Lucas. It was an article about a struggling free clinic, Chloe's clinic. Funding had been cut. They were on the verge of shutting down. Lucas's heartbeat quickened. He didn't hesitate. "Get my team. We're saving that clinic." Chloe walked toward the clinic, her heart heavy. She had given everything to this place, but the landlord had made it clear. Without money, they were shutting down. As she reached the entrance, she stopped. The building looked different. Fresh paint, new signs. And through the windows she could see brand new medical equipment. Confused, she rushed inside and froze. Standing in the center of the newly renovated clinic was Lucas. He turned when he heard her, his expression unreadable. "What?" What do you do? Chloe whispered. Lucas swallowed. I fixed it. She shook her head. Why? What do you get out of this? Lucas stepped closer, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. I didn't do this to win you back, Chloe. I did this because I finally understand why you fought so hard for this place. And I wanted to fight for it too. Chloe's throat tightened. She had spent so long believing people like him didn't care. But here he was, proving her wrong. Lucas hesitated before adding, You taught me what kindness really means. Now let me prove I've learned something. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, she let them fall. Maybe, just maybe. As Chloe turned to look at the clinic, her life's work now saved, Lucas stood beside her, silent but steady, a new beginning. And for the first time, Lucas Marshall, the billionaire, felt truly rich. Do you think Lucas truly changed? Or was it just guilt? Let us know in the comments.